Hey everybody, welcome to the final class for musical theater history, the rebellious history of musical theater. I am so excited. We've had such a fun time this month. I mean, I guess I'm assuming you have. Hopefully you have. But yeah, I'm super excited. And today is going to be a little bit of a different format because we're going to be talking about what comes next and kind of using some data and then the information that we've talked about from the rest of the class to dive into like making some conjectures about the future. So why don't we go ahead and we're just going to go and get started and see where today takes us. So there will be lots of opportunity to talk. So for those of you that are watching live, if you want to unmute yourself, like once we get to like the discussion parts, rather than having yourself like unmuted, or excuse me, muted, go ahead and do that so we can just like have an open dialogue. It doesn't need to be as like structured as in the past. Okay, so one last time, we'll go over all of the things. Which that is not one of the things we want to go over. This is though, right? Nope. Give me one moment. I'm slightly losing my mind, slowly but surely. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen because this is embarrassing. And get my next one. Let me make sure I've got where the right one is. Okay, great. Now I have it. Okay, sorry everybody about that. I'm having all kinds of technical things today. I think my computer actually might break soon, so that's fun. Okay, let's try this again. Here we go. Last time looking over all of these things. Is this the right? Yes, okay, great. Let's go and we will start. How do I do this? Okay, great. Okay, so this is the fifth class of, as I said, the rebellious history of musical theater. So the goals for this class, which hopefully will all culminate today, is how musical theater history is the same as American history, how musical theater as a genre is almost always rooted in some kind of rebellion, whether it is a response to current events and culture, a cautionary tale of past events, or poses questions about the future based on society's current path. It's always going to be pushing back against culture in some way. As we talked about last week, though, we're kind of starting to see a little bit of a trend away from that, just with the emergence of the movie musical and the jukebox musical. As a correction, that was not last week. That was 2 weeks ago. And so we're also hoping that through this course, you'll be able to better understand the importance behind knowing the who, what, when, where, and why behind musical theater and why this matters. So this is what we've done so far. So we started out the whole series looking at musical theater history and how it's the same as American history, or it parallels it. Week 2, we looked at the Golden Age and the musicals that came out then. Week 3, we looked at the idea of what musicals are leading us to a potential new Golden Age of musical theater. Last week, we looked at the creatives that created and defined musical theater. And today, we are going to look at what comes next. So as I've said a million times now, musical theater is a relatively new history. I am not an expert, but my history and my analysis comes from the lenses of applied theater, dramaturgy, education, and political science, with an emphasis in social discourse, which is why we're looking at rebellious nature of musical theater. I am a cis white female, so I inherently have some bias, and I just want to call that out as we look through the stories and my studies and how that presents in the research for this class. And then finally, and this is important today, there's a good chance that we won't necessarily look at your favorite musical. I am sorry in advance, and this is not a slight at the musical, unless Cats is your favorite musical, and then you should pick a better favorite musical. All right, so at ReTheater, our 5 core tenets that we are hoping you will better be able to start to understand how to dig into through this class is to understand why it's important to know who wrote the story, what the story is about, when it was written and when the story takes place, where it was written and where does the story take place, and why was the show written? So like, what inspired the writer and what did they hope to gain or contribute from writing this story? So today we are going to put all those things together and we are going to look at what comes next. So before we dive into all of this, and we have some really fun like stats and lists and all those things, I would love to know what your personal opinion is and hear what musical impacted you the most in the past 14 years. So if we're looking from 2014 to present. So does anybody want to share what musical deeply impacted them in the last 14 years? Or if you all do, that'd be great too.
I'll go. I have to say Dear Evan Hansen as as basic as it is. I have to kind of preface it like that because I think it's a really important. I think what Pasek and Paul are doing. I'll say this again and again, but I think it's like so good, and I think I think what they're doing for musical theater is so cool because and as well as Lin-Manuel, but it was 8th grade, and I was always I kind of liked Wicked. I thought Defying Gravity was a really good song, but that was like kind of all I knew about musical theater until 8th grade. And then we went on a school trip and we saw Dear Evan Hansen, and like obviously it was Ben Platt, so it was awesome. But it kind of proved to me as the kid who kind of saw musical theater as like going to see at the Paramount like The King and I, and these older shows that just weren't necessarily hip and cool, and like directly the music wasn't something I'd listen to in the car. So like I think that just proved to me that musical theater is fresh. I think that's the coolest thing about it, and I think that's the biggest. I've been talking to my friends after this class and about how like and Drew Gasparini, we love that guy. I think that just like the stuff that's coming out like now is really, really cool. But what happens is when I'm talking to my friends about musical theater is this like spectacle that you go see, and it doesn't really impact. It's kind of like just an entertainment. It's like going to a ballet. Not that you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like when you go see a ballet, it's kind of like, okay, we're just watching something. So, and I just was like, musical theater, if it's doing that, it's not good. If it's being a spectacle, then it's not fulfilling the intention. But Dear Evan Hansen definitely taught me that musical theater is fresh and it's impactful. And then from there, I was able to experience a lot of other great stuff. So
that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Matthew. Great. Anybody else want to share for like what musical? So hi, Sean. We are talking about what musical was the most impactful for us in the last 14 years. So from 2014 to now. If you want to share, you can. Whoever can go. Sean, you want to go right away? Great. Do it.
100% Next to Normal. Yeah, that just really introduced me to the idea that a musical could be about the struggles of today, and it could be just small and intimate. That musical feels like a play, really, with music. But yeah, I mean, before seeing Next to Normal, my experience with musicals was like The Phantom and The Producers, and I was definitely listening to like Jason Robert Brown stuff, but like, yeah, not until I saw Next to Normal in the booth theater, which is like, if you look at the list of shows that have been in the booth theater, it's mostly plays. So yeah, just to see something just so relevant and so intimate and impactful, yeah, really opened my mind to what musicals could do. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, Rita, go for it.
I have two. My first one is Urinetown. That was my first show that I did in high school. I had done theater and stuff before that, but it kind of showed me that like it's okay to laugh at yourself, and there is a different way to go about performance other than spectacle.
Yeah.
and like, you know, you got to play, like, I was in the ensemble, but like I got to make a character and like really go all out with it. We had names, we had to call each other by the names. It just made you feel like you were part of something. So Urinetown was definitely really impactful for me. And I probably say it every week, Bright Star. I saw it and I was just immediately moved by it. Everything about it was just so different with the bluegrass music and the storyline. Even though you kind of knew it was going to happen, like I just wanted more. I wanted to know, just be more immersed into the show and into the world of Bright Star and Nebulin and all that stuff. So Zebulon and all that stuff. So those are my two shows.
I love that. Thank you. I mean, I also love Bright Star. So we're going to talk about Bright Star today, actually. So.
Oh, I cannot wait. I cannot wait.
Marianne or Sarah, would you like to share?
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about stuff, and I wasn't really thinking about a specific show, but I was thinking about, like, the first show that I ever went to go see was Phantom of the Opera, which is a spectacle show,
Mm-hmm.
and Les Mis, which is just like this big show, and Beauty and the Beast, and all these kind of big spectacle shows like Matthew was talking about, and how we got into like the movie musicals and everything like that, and jukebox musicals. And I had always loved the golden age.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very frustrating for me to go and see these kinds of musicals. But then in 2003, we have Thoroughly Modern Millie, and then we have Drowsy Chaperone and The Gentleman's Guide, and kind of this revival of this neoclassic revival in theater. And I really enjoyed the fact that people could still recall that and remember how important a book is, and remember how important not just belting is in a show. And then the other thing I was thinking about is how different technology is. Gentleman's Guide as well, how that whole stage within a stage was all digital. And then I did the Broadway Teachers Workshop a few years back, and we went to go see An American in Paris, and how they had the big screens and you could see them drawing, and the drawing was moving around. It was how the technology of theater has evolved and become such an essential part of the story in some shows. That has really impacted me and how I direct at my shows too.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, how, like, just the difference in like the technology and how we're producing work is definitely evolving. So that's great. I love that.
I was just thinking when you were talking like about the spectacle and how big like that word just kind of pointed out a lot to me, especially when thinking about acting. It definitely, like, think a lot of times when acting when you see an actor on a stage and they make you uncomfortable, I think it's really easy to think it's bad acting. It's if they're not being charismatic, and if they're not always pulling you in out with that charisma, it's really easy to see them as a bad actor. I just watched myself in Into the Woods, because I like
watching and critiquing yourself.
No, see, okay, but it's so enjoyable. I love it, you know. But and it genuinely does. It's like, okay, well, sometimes I do things right and sometimes I do things wrong, you know. And you know, say what you want about critiquing yourself, but I like it. But anyways, I was just like, yeah, this is not a charismatic person, you know, and realizing that that's okay, and that sometimes musical theater is ugly. Like, I think that's kind of a beautiful thing. And just because people might say, you know what, you were really all over the place in that scene, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, you can't always be the strong leading man that because it doesn't make the lows low. Yeah, that's a different conversation, but it just brought up. Yeah.
I think it's a good one, especially in later today. We're gonna touch very briefly on like the different evolving style of acting that musical theater is seeing as well, and so I think that's a really great point. Awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and let's go through fairly quickly some stats. So we can kind of now formulate where we go from here. All right. Okay, so as we talked about, we had this quote come up at the beginning of 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about this idea of this quote and what it means. So it's clear that musical theater is changing. No one knows where it's going to go. Perhaps it's not going to one place, but to many. That would be healthy, I think, just as a search in itself can be healthy. Thus it was for Shakespeare in Elizabethan times, thus it was for the writers of musicals after Rodgers and Hammerstein, and thus it will be again. In the meantime, we have no choice but to be explorers as well as practitioners to discover and set the limitations, which will provide us our own discovery and release. Great. So that, I think that's going to be a really great basis for us to go off of today, and to look at and discuss where we are going, and to keep this in mind that it's not necessarily about us comparing to the past and being negative or overly critical of new work, but instead saying, okay, how is this going to change, and where is it going to change, and where is it going to go, and as educators and as young artists, how can we help support this growth, and how can we potentially influence it? I mean, we're living in a very strange time where things are breaking and they needed to be broken, but we get to actually be an active part of the repair and steering the path of where we go. And actually, that's on that note, I read a very interesting article. I can't remember where it was today. I can't remember if it was American Theater Magazine or somewhere else, but it was talking about how, as opposed to in the past where Broadway kind of sets the standard, and is like the leader of where theater is going. I know that's like with a heavy asterisk next to it, but Broadway is not going to open first. Regional theaters are going to be opening first, community theaters, and we're going to see how we can create art in these spaces with a lot of people again, but also looking at models for how can we get theater out to the masses or to more people, and also looking at how can we produce these works that we've done in the past that have these huge budgets when we can't fill full seats, and what shows are people going to come out and see. So I thought that was interesting, because then we're all like, Broadway is like going to have to take the lead of so many other theaters, which is kind of cool. Alrighty. So what we're going to do is we're going to start zooming out and looking at musical theater from 2004 to present. And then we are going to like zoom in even more onto the last 5 years of musical theater. So I wanted to just start by looking at the Tony winners of Best New Musical since 2004. So here we go. I think that this is a fascinating list of musicals, and I would love from you all, looking at this list, what are your initial impressions and thoughts about this collection of shows, and potentially what that could mean going forward? If anybody wants to share anything, like initial reactions to this.
Wait, did Wicked win? I thought.
Sorry, nope, that's an error. I'm an idiot.
Dude,
I literally wrote down, don't write down Wicked. It was Avenue Q. Please excuse that. I will update that in the final one. Embarrassing. Yes, thank you, Matthew, for that that correction.
Lindsay, can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so like, what are you looking at this list, and what are some initial like thoughts or any reactions to what this list represents as far as musical theater? Like for me, when I look at this list, it is all over the place.
All over the place. I was just gonna say that too. It's like comedy, teen angst, drama, rapping, people kicking their faces, people not dancing at all.
Yeah, there's like big spectacle shows. There's like very minimalist shows, like.
Yeah, but like jukebox, but like then history, and then like movie musicals and.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else?
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say that the band, like, just the band's visit, and then you have like Book of Mormon. It definitely, and then once, like, yeah, small, just I'll
I was gonna say that it's interesting the topics that they all touch upon, though. Like when you think about musicals up to Showboat, or even going forward from Showboat, you don't really have a lot of multiculturalism in theater. And then here you're looking at something, looking at In the Heights, and then Billy Elliot, which is a completely, I know it's a different country, but then you have Memphis, Book of Mormon. These are all, they're cultural, I don't want to say cultural treatises, but you're talking about cultural separations. Kinky Boots, Hamilton, The Band's Visit, like.
Fun Home.
Yep. Yeah, it's a very diverse group. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I was kind of zeroing in on Memphis because I had to quick check my wiki research just to make sure, but that was also the year that Fela and American Idiot were up for Best Musical too. And I mean, I don't really know Memphis that well, but I don't remember it getting great reviews. But like I look at like were we at a time in theater where they were ready to give Best Musical to a show like Fela or American Idiot? Yeah.
Well, from a structural standpoint, Memphis definitely was the strongest that year, like from a structure. And also from, if we look at like what was going to draw the most audience members in, for sure Memphis. However, I personally think Memphis is garbage.
And what a lot of people don't realize is producers are the ones that vote on this award, and a lot of them are thinking, what's going to tour?
Right.
American Idiot didn't tour well. I don't think did Fela have a tour? I mean,
Fela
maybe
did not have a tour.
The other show that was nominated that year for Best Musical was $1 Million Quartet, and I think that's still kind of like healthily still moving in places. But yeah, you're right. Memphis was very much like the traditional musical of that year. But yeah, I'm looking at all these shows and like, yeah, they're all like, I mean, Spring Awakening aren't really anymore, and In the Heights, but a lot of them are still like on tour. I mean, like Jersey Boys is still actually running in New York. But like Once is on tour, Kinky Boots is on tour. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely have staying power. And I think when we think of staying power on Broadway, we think a lot of like Phantom and those like Chicago, those mainstays. But if we think about, especially having looked at the Golden Age and we've talked about the comparison in run times, right? Like, I mean, now people want to run for forever, but that wasn't always necessarily the case. And so I think from a standpoint of what does have longevity and like what is impactful, almost all of these musicals pass that test. The one that you could argue, well, the two that you could argue would be Gentleman's Guide and Band's Visit. Band's Visit had a really short Broadway run. But most of these
Fun Home too, that only lasted about a year.
Right. Yes, Fun Home. Sorry, my screen is like on that side. Yeah, Fun Home too. So for the majority of these, though, they have been like very successful. But we can talk about why maybe those weren't as successful at some point today.
Quick question in terms of structure of the musicals. Am I right that Fun Home is the only Tony winner that doesn't have an intermission?
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I haven't seen Hadestown, but I'm assuming that's like it's a typical 2.5 hour one intermission show.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like we literally like pretty much every category, everywhere we look, it's all over the board. I think this is important, especially because thinking about what a lot of people think of musical theater today, where it's just a bunch of movie musicals and big spectacle shows, this list validates that thought, but it also pushes back against it because there's a lot on this list that did end up winning that is not necessarily super traditional. My dog is being very loud. I really apologize. He decided to wake up for the first time today. Thank you. Okay, great. So that's just like a quick look. And so then let's talk more. So once we look at these best Tony winners, now we can look a little bit more at how they actually like separate out from between movie musicals, jukebox, adaptation, and apps like and original. And I said original-ish. That's a little bit of a gray area because we can argue that some of those aren't original. So my initial thoughts when I saw this was I was pretty shocked that there's only been one jukebox musical. I mean, not shocked because I think that jukebox musicals are amazing, but shocked from a standpoint of the fact that like they're so heavily prevalent today in musical theater, but only one has won an award for best musical. So looking at this, does anybody have like what are your thoughts on how these musicals break down? Does anybody have any thoughts? Because again, it's kind of like all over the place as well.
And we'll have to add Avenue Q to the original-ish list.
Yes, because again, I'm the worst and just read my notes completely wrong.
Wait, what was Gentleman's Guide an adaptation of?
There's a book that it's based on. Like it's from like 1907.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is kind of like how these break down. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to go ahead and look more, like we're going to zoom out. So these statistics are taken from musicals that were nominated for Best Musical between now and 2019. They don't include this year's shows. We will include this year's shows in different statistics. But so this is anything that was nominated for Best Musical, regardless if it won or not. And so these, I thought these were also interesting, and obviously like it proves the trend that movie musicals definitely are more popular right now, as well as like material from previous information or different original sources. But we do still see a fair number of original shows, although if you look at that compared to the movie musicals, we have over double movie musicals than we do original, which says something about potentially where we're gonna head. Okay, so this is going to look, now this looks at specifically the best musical nominees from 2015 on. It also is going to include some revivals, not every revival, as well as I included this year's shows that would have been potentially up for new musicals. So what is interesting on this list and important to note, and I would love your additional feedback because you guys are all so wonderful at that. With the new musicals, we don't have reviews out for all of them, and we don't know ultimately where a lot of them were going to shake out as far as story and where they were going to go, because as we know, in previews, things can change fairly drastically. So this is kind of just like, as we've been looking through this whole course, we've been talking a lot about musical theater that pushed back against social norms and race and gender and sexuality, as well as structure. And so this is kind of where we shake out in the last 5 years. When we look at social norms, we see a lot. There's a lot more that are popping up over there around mental health. And we also see some a fair trend in how we look at not just LGBTQ folks being represented on stage, but how those stories are told, and not necessarily from a point of view that like, hey, the whole conflict revolves around this person's gender, sexuality, which is why some of these shows are listed under this category as well. And so that's that. Also, I will also note on here, I tried really hard to give some shows something, although I'm not gonna lie, I couldn't do it for some of them because they were just nonsense. And so if you guys take a look, let me know if there's any that you think should be added on here. One thing I think is interesting to note is that as we look through this list, the structure list, I think, kind of validates that quote at the beginning of this this specific class that we're looking at, because it just emphasizes how much structure is all over the place. Like if you look at that list from Fun Home, Hamilton, Bright Star, Great Comet, Band's Visit, Hadestown, and Jagged Little Pill, like that, and Six, those are all so vastly different. But they all are challenging structure, from nonlinear storytelling to one-act musicals, which personally I hope we see more of because I love one-acts. Looking at the kinds of styles of music that we see between Hamilton and Bright Star, even Great Comet, is so vastly different. Band's Visit really continues to ask the question of like, what is a musical and what is a play with music, and how does the storytelling work in a way that, especially when it's not necessarily a spectacle show. Hadestown also plays around with this new idea that Rachel Chernoff is really starting to like come into her own around, which is like this reimagining of classic stories or classic literature and how those can be brought up to speed. Also, Hadestown did a lot of really interesting work as far as its staging and all of that. Jagged Little Pill I put on here just because Jagged Little Pill is like kind of, I think, going to be redefining what the jukebox musical is, and how it actually, if we stop just relying on the necessarily the music to propel the story, how we can use jukebox music to like deepen our characters' point of view. And then if you like, Six obviously is like a giant rock concert, which also begs the question of like, what makes a musical? Like, is Six a review? Is it a musical? Like, where does it land in the universe? And then with revivals, we see a lot of questioning about abilities on stage, about race, and how do we restructure shows? Can we restructure shows? At what point? Like with West Side Story, it's a really great question of at what point when we restructure shows, are they no longer the original show? And plus, even Van Hove, he's a master in like questioning form and pushing form. So is Daniel Fish, and with Oklahoma, but they're both so very different. And looking at how that all works, I put Carousel also under the structure one, because it was questioning a lot of how does gender conscious casting and gender blind casting affect our ideas around revivals. So with Joshua Henry playing Billy Bigelow, what additional stories were told there, and looking at like how can we do this with in future revivals. Oklahoma also did this in a less obvious way. It was kind of like the twist at the end. And so, yeah, so gender and sexuality, obviously we're seeing a change in a lot of ways. We're seeing a new generation of playwrights come out where we're seeing transgender stories told, transgender actors having major roles. Oh my God, my dog is going to drive me insane. Sorry. And so we're seeing a little bit of a shift in specifically like how we talk about gender and sexuality on stage. And Jagged Little Pill is full of this. If you are not familiar with Jagged Little Pill, tomorrow we're releasing a podcast episode where we're talking specifically about it. And Dr. Drama, who's a therapist and a dramatist, she talks about Jagged Little Pill specifically and how it's one of the first stories that has a non-binary main character as well as non-binary actors. So we kind of see all of this. We also with race are starting to figure out like how does race affect the stories that we're telling, how, and not only that, but what stories about race are we telling? I mean, with the exception pretty much of Color Purple and Shuffle Along, we don't see like this super traditional, like this is a Black story, the end. We see a lot of different points of view being told throughout the story that are much more diverse than normal, and that's not necessarily having a cast of color predominantly tell a story that revolves solely around their conflict with that story. The other thing too is with specifically West Side Story, West Side Story, yes, King and I and Miss Saigon, those three also looked at how previous ideations of these musicals were racist or problematic, and looking at how can we explore those better, and can we update material to make it work for today's audiences, rather than just putting up material that like doesn't necessarily really work anymore and just saying we're doing it because we're doing it. Okay, so based on this list, I just would love to open it up for a moment before we go into the structured questions, or like guided questions, what anybody's initial thoughts based on this list are, or if you have other things you want to add to this list. Great. Let's go then to the guided questions. So at any point in time, we can go back to these slides, which kind of break everything down. Okay, so the first things that, these are just some like the first 3 questions I would love for us to kind of investigate based on this information, but also the idea of what we've talked about in the previous classes. So based on the fact that obviously with things like Hamilton, we're starting to see a different take on race and how that is portrayed on stage, as well as gender. If we looked at those 2 columns, there's a lot going on and a lot of shifting. So what ripple effects do you think the new focus on race and gender will bring? We can even put, you can put the prom into there, Jagged Little Pill, all of those things. And so based on Hamilton and the success of these stories that are talking about more marginalized populations, but also thinking about color conscious casting, like what kinds of stories do you anticipate seeing more of in the next 10 to 15 years? As well as how will LGBTQ folks be represented on stage? I mean, if we look, Fun Home won the best musical. Is that going to create something in the future? All right, so go ahead and unmute yourselves, and let's start talking. If anybody has any initial thoughts on any of these 3 questions.
Yeah, let me jump in on the third one, just being, I really hope, wait, hold on. I think we skipped the slide.
Here we go, we're back.
Oh, there we go. How will the LGBTQ, I mean, maybe this is just idealistic thinking, but I think we are moving in this direction where the stories about LGBTQ plus people will be able to stop just having these shows that are basically for cis audiences to kind of understand that community. And I mean, unfortunately for so many, it's the need to see their coming out. So I mean, I hope to see much more shows like I mean, I know it didn't have a long run, but Head Over Heels, I really wish that would have had a longer run, and more shows like that where you have queer love stories and trans bodies on stage and they're just there. It's not about them being oppressed. It's not about them dealing with conservative parents. It's not about them coming out. It's just about them living their lives. And I really hope that's something that we see reflected on Broadway.
Do you think that we will? Like, do you feel like there's like enough of, based on the other shows that we've seen having success, or the kinds of stories we're starting to see, do you think that that's something that will potentially happen? Or if anybody else wants to jump in on that too.
To be honest, it's going to have to take a lot, just because, I mean, perfect example is both Kinky Boots and The Prom, with their performances on the Macy's Day Parade, and how certain parts of the country just went wild. And Oscar Eustis was on a podcast I listened to not long ago. He runs The Public, and he brought up, like, Broadway is really, it's a tourist place, and they're really doing their best to attract middle of the country people who are coming to New York for their vacation. And I mean, the Public, places like The Public or The Signature or La Mama or Rattlestick, I mean, they're the spots for these stories. But I mean, I think it's going to take a lot for Broadway to stop worrying about offending the Midwest folks that are coming in for some good old wholesome theater, and that think queer stories aren't good and wholesome, which makes me sick.
Sure. I'm going to push back and somebody else can you can argue and tell me I'm wrong. So if we look at the shows though, and what is being done, there is a lot on here of these new shows that do not fall into that category. I think that Broadway, because we do have things like Phantom that have run for forever. We have Frozen, we do have some of these shows that don't even make any of the categories necessarily up here. But if we look, this is a pretty diverse set of stories. I think if we looked at shows from 2000 until 2010, we'd have a very different snapshot. Because in there we have things like Mamma Mia, these jukebox musicals. So while I definitely agree with you, and I believe that there are places necessarily that it is very tourist attraction and the gamification of musical theater. I think that my personal thought is that we are moving in a direction where we are going to see more of these stories told. Who knows how long they'll be there for, but we're not going to see a total everything's going to be a movie musical, because on that list there's a lot of original or Midwest controversial stuff. And I mean, I'm in the Midwest and I'm from the Midwest, so I talking about my family a lot. So I don't know, that's just my thought, but I also agree with you. I'm not saying that I don't agree, but I do think that we are seeing more queer stories told, not at the rate that we'd love though. I don't know. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Please argue with me.
I just know kids are yeah, I mean, you think the new generation is super super progressive, and it's really easy to see that on Instagram as there's feminism and gender equality and being woke is all very very easy. One can advertise themselves as that, so it's easy to see many kids as that way. I think there are still a lot of kids that are not. I go to kind of a more conservative school. It's in kind of a but I mean I went to Catholic school for 2 years, so I mean they're kids. I don't think a lot of people are ready to go see, or frankly will enjoy seeing a musical like The Prom. As good as it would be for them, I don't think, I mean, you can't force someone to change their mind. And I think it's going to take a long time for these kids that are just so stuck in tradition to enjoy something like that without mocking it or wanting to buy a ticket for that. So I think it is important that as Broadway, if you are trying to attract a new generation of people to Broadway, it's important, I think, that you have these stories 100%. I also think it's important that you can advertise to the people, because I think it's better to have them be exposed to it than because they won't go see a show like The Prom or even Hadestown. That it's too, I mean, why would they want to see, they want to see something funny. They want to see something exciting. So with those shows, you get them into musical theater with the good music. That's what Pasek and Paul are doing. La La Land, Greatest Showman, so important, because it's getting these kids, oh, you know what? I really like La La Land. I'm listening to it. Okay, let's listen to something else now. And maybe I'll go see it. And same with Be More Chill. I mean, kids really enjoy seeing it. So I think musicals like that, even though Sondheim walked out of Be More Chill, I that's the funniest thing ever. But I think it's super, super important to have musicals like what Drew Gasparini is doing right now. And I don't know. I just think that it's going to be a long time before that's a normal thing, because when you're in the, I'm sorry, I keep talking, but when we're in the Broadway world with all of these really progressive people, I think it's, what do I know? I'm a kid, but I just know that when I'm surrounded by a lot of other theater kids, it's really easy to get caught up in the world of yes, this is the world. But when you get outside and you realize that no, people are still crappy. You know, I think it's hard to recognize what your audience is sometimes in the Broadway and what your audience is and what it could be. If you
That's a really interesting thought, Matthew, and I think something that is worthwhile. And Sean, I also think where you come from on all this is really important and is very much in juxtaposition, but great. So I know you have something to say.
I'm gonna push back on one thing that Matthew said, which is Broadway. The Broadway community is a progressive community. It is really not. I think it tries to, and I'm not saying like everybody, but I think seeing the Broadway community reaction to Me Too, especially, and I mean, and just putting on these shows and but the putting on the shows they do, like Tootsie, and I mean, I don't know how Mrs. Doubtfire is, but I'm sorry, it's another show about a guy in a dress. Haha, that's
exactly
funny.
The same show. Exactly.
But I think Broadway really tries to tout itself as being, oh yeah, we're progressive, we're welcoming and everything. But like I said, but then there's no reaction to Me Too. I mean, there's literally a person starring in a Broadway show this season who shared nude photos of his colleague, and the producers of that show stood by him.
I know.
And it's just like,
I know.
yeah, it's and it's just really hard. And
I think that what you're saying, like really, and Sean, like knowing your background and stuff, like I think that what you really talk a lot about, and I think is important, is like there is a differentiation between Broadway and theater.
Right.
And I think that is really important. And even people like the public, right? And Signature, like all those theaters that you listed, I have my own quorums with a lot of them.
Oh, no. And, right. And I mean, when Me Too came up, like theaters all over the country, from the Alley in Houston, Profiles Theater out in Chicago, Long Wharf in Connecticut, we saw that, oh, this is like predators are thriving in these places. And people are being harmed by these toxic men in power, usually men in power and everything. And I mean, I'm seeing it here in my own theater community of just like people like posting about, oh, we're welcoming and everything, but then like, here's our new season of all shows by cis white men. So it's, and I mean, the public has its issues, the Signature has its issues. I mean, any company where, I mean, theater, just like anything, there's power imbalances, and unfortunately, people are going to exploit those power imbalances.
Right.
But I think it's a lot because Broadway is so high profile, and so many people are looking at Broadway as this is theater.
Right.
I think like, sorry.
I was just going to say, actually going back to what Matthew said, I think that you made a really good point about, high school kids going to a show and what can they sit through. And not just, I think that teaching high school, I do find that they're a little bit more open here in New York, but even beyond that, when you go to a show in New York, a Broadway show in New York, you're talking about easily $100, $200 a ticket. And here's a family coming in from, say, Ohio or something like that, and it's a family. So maybe 2, 3, 4 tickets. And if they're going to pay that much for a show, especially with these newer shows that everybody's flocking to, that do make a statement, like Dear Evan Hansen, like Hadestown, you have families that, one, aren't going to pay the money to see those shows and are instead going to go to pay to see something like Phantom of the Opera because they can get mezzanine seats for $40 a ticket.
Mhm.
And also these families that maybe the subject matter isn't that uncomfortable, they're not going to pay that money to therefore have an uncomfortable conversation with their kids afterwards. If they're on a trip,
Yes.
they're going to pay money to see something that everybody's just going to have a fun time with. And if it comes up in our daily life later on, if it comes up in a TV show at home, that's a safe environment for us to have that conversation in.
Yeah, and I think too, just want to like throw this out as like a statistic. So after a show's been on Broadway for 18 months, you have to discount that it is running based on New York audience and a tri-state audience. So if a show makes it past 18 months, it is considered a tourist show. So things like Dear Evan Hansen really now aren't like, I know like I have friends who like artists, right? We can't afford to go see the work we do. So I have friends who haven't seen Dear Evan Hansen, but like I have also a bunch of friends who are in finance who have, and I'm like, what? Why? Tell me more. But I think that that's important to remember too, is that a lot of these shows that we maybe think are like too controversial or whatever, like they are lasting. Spring Awakening lasted past the 18 mark when it first came out. Next to Normal did. So people are wanting to see this. It's just how fast, and as a artistic community, not necessarily a producing community, I think what Matthew said too about how it's very easy for us to get in this bubble of like, oh, I should be able to produce this work and write this work. But, and people will come see it because it's important to my community, but like how far is the outreach from that? And that's like the whole like struggle that we're in when we talk specifically about Broadway, because it's so overproduced and so expensive. Okay. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Can I just want to say something to Sean.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I think the fact that I agree with you. Yeah. I think Broadway does try to be more aggressive, more progressive than they might be. But I think what is really important to look at is the fact that people are producing the prom. To be able to even take that stand, I think is a really big statement. Where, kids on the football team wouldn't even want to humor that idea. That I think that's the difference between. Even yes, there's tons of bad stuff going on, but at least they're humoring the idea, and that is the start to it. So, yeah, but I don't know if that's a valid thing that I said.
I mean, that's what's great is everybody's coming from very different points of view, so I love it. Okay, let's look. I'm gonna like pull that last slide up again just for a second. And I think stemming off of this, we can continue to talk about these three questions for sure. But does anybody have any last thoughts like that you want, or like ideas or things that popped up from that and that little exchange just happened as far like, do you think, I guess my question for all of you is, what do you think that the ripple effects of the new focus on race and gender will bring? Like, because as a community, we're a lot more focused on that. Do you think that we'll start to see that based on like the trends of what we're seeing right now? So if we look at this chart, do you think that we're going to start, how do you think that those are going to manifest?
Lindsay, did you freeze?
Oh no, did it freeze up?
I can't see you right now.
Oh no. I can hear you again. This is great.
Can I bring something up just
yes,
specifically in terms of directors?
Yes.
I'm hoping that this trend of Hadestown, and Paulus has been around for a while, but Hadestown and Slave Play, I know it's not musical, but I'm hoping that this whole belief that only white men can be trusted directing a show can go away. I mean, a big reason, there's a lot of reasons why I didn't want to support the West Side Story, but especially once I heard Ivo Van Hove, I'm just like, no, like he's not the one to be doing this story. But yeah, it's just like, I really want to start seeing diverse directors' perspectives, especially on the Golden Age shows. So when you see something like Hadestown making money and Slave Play making money, like, okay, like, let's give Rachel Chavkin more stuff to do. Let's give Robert O'Hara another show to do. And yeah, there's, I mean, like, and I have my list of like classic shows I want to be revived, and like see a female director with that perspective take it on. So I'm hoping, yeah, I would like to see a really big ripple effect in the terms of directors, because yeah, I mean, we can put as much diversity on the stage, but when it comes down to it, it really needs to be in all parts of the production.
Absolutely. Do you think that we'll see I mean, you kind of mentioned it, with like the success of some of these female directors. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Like, do you think we'll start to see more representation, not just essentially on stage, but off stage as well?
I mean, I really hope so. And I mean, I think it also has to start with producers too. I mean, it's just the bias of a guy producer has a bias, and he's going to hire, especially a male producer of a certain age from a certain generation. It's just like there's been studies on it, and he just has this bias that he can trust a man more than he can trust a woman with his money and his with a big production like that. So I mean, I would like to see who's the next generation of Daryl Roths and other female producers and producers of color. I mean, I think a lot of them that are doing the most interesting work just don't have any interest in Broadway, because I think they're just seeing that it's on a scale that people just aren't making, that the people who are doing really interesting work just aren't really interested in.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Hey, can I ask a question? So it looks like my Zoom is not is frozen. I am going to, I don't know what will happen, but it's telling me I have to close the program. So I'm going to come back in, but if I go away, just click back on it in like 1 second. Is that okay, everybody?
Okay. Do you want to assign one of us to be, because you have to assign one of us to be the leader of the meeting, because if you leave,
I can't do anything. It's just
okay.
The screen is blank. So
Gotcha.
Just one moment. If you get kicked out, just click the link again, and I'll be back in like 1 second. Okay, here we go. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Well, I'm back. Sorry about that. That was really annoying. But okay, great. So let's go. If anybody else has anything else you want to add about that slide, feel free. But let's go and look at the final slide, or the final couple of questions. So here we go. Okay. So these questions are, I think, interesting we're going to look a little bit more like the structural impact. So I think we can get into things like Hamilton and how that's going to affect things. But if we think about the 5 musicals that have won in the last 5 years, these things all really impact it. And then I also think looking at the musicals that will be coming out, some of us probably don't know a lot about them. So as we go through, I'm happy to throw things in and we can start to talk about these things. So some questions that I just had for you guys is, how do you think that the whole, we looked at 2004 to present, right? It's a bunch of mishmash of like what is winning, what is not, like the structures, the styles, all of that. So right now we're in this redefining period, and how do you think that that's going to impact the shows that we see? How will the emergence of non-traditional musicals affect the landscape? So when we look at things like Hamilton, like The Band's Visit, like Fun Home, I mean, even if we look at like Bright Star, if we go back to this slide, like all of these structures, they're all impacting the way that that musical theater is told. And how do you think that that will affect the landscape? Also, if we look at mental health and how that is on stage, when we look at things like Dear Evan Hansen, there are a lot of shows that are starting to explore that. Jagged Little Pill this season really does, in so many ways. So how do you think we'll see more shows that have that in, or do you think that we'll start to see how that impacts audience members and the way that they're prepared for shows? And then finally, so the last 5 musicals to win Best Musical either have been created or have either created new standards for spectacle or bucked against the trend completely. So, I mean, all 5 of them, except for Dear Evan Hansen, I think we can argue, don't have the traditional spectacle that we've seen. And when we think about like the early 2000s with things like Hairspray and Mamma Mia, even Thoroughly Modern Millie, Billy Elliot, these like massive mega musicals, we don't see those as much anymore. We have Dear Evan Hansen is spectacle, but it's also minimalist at the same time. So is Fun Home, so is Hadestown. Even though Hadestown has a massive set, it's a unit set. Like they're really inventive in how they use it. And then if we look at the shows from this current season, things like Girl from the North Country, 6 obviously is like a rock concert. So, but like the way that the mechanics are used in it are really interesting. So those are the questions that I have, and just kind of thinking about what we know of musical theater and where we think we're going. Does anybody have any thoughts on any of these questions?
The 5 best musical Tony winners again.
Let's go back and look at that. So it would be Fun Home, Hamilton, Dear Evan Hansen, The Band's Visit, and Hadestown.
I mean, one major trend that I see continuing is they've all been developed by nonprofit and out of town for many of them.
Absolutely.
Like Fun Home and Hamilton were both at the Public. Dear Evan Hansen was second stage and was developed in DC. Band's Visit was the Atlantic, and Hadestown, there was like one in Canada. It was at ART, it was at New York Theatre Workshop, and then London, and then before coming to, and didn't like 6, like wasn't 6 like on a cruise before it opened on Broadway?
He's like has like the craziest journey.
Yeah, so I think the days of just coming out right out of the gate, I'm just looking at even beyond this. I mean, well, I guess Gentleman's Guide was the last one that just went, maybe they had like an out-of-town tryout, but it pretty much went straight to Broadway. But I mean, but once was New York Theatre Workshop. Kinky Boots, no, Kinky Boots came to Book of Mormon. Billy Elliot came from
Kinky Boots,
the West End.
Is in Ohio, or excuse me, in Chicago. That's where they
okay. As like an out-of-town tryout, though, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah. So I think.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think the other big trend is that they're all musical dramas. I mean, if you look at 5 year, after that 5-year mark, you have a lot of comedies mixed into there, and it's not just all musical dramas, but all of the past 5 years, with the exception, I think, of Hadestown. I'm going to be honest, I don't know Band's Visit that well. I didn't really click with me, but they're all very socio-political, or have a strong message about society, whereas before that you have it here and there, but it's not every single year.
Band's Visit was like that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm also noticing that playwrights that aren't usually known for musicals I'm seeing a trend with that, because like Fun Home, Lisa Kron, I think that was her first musical, Stephen Levinson. I want to say that was his first musical for Dear Evan Hansen. Idamar Moses didn't do musicals before the band does it. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I think they also, these 5 have a really strong book, even if it's not a book in traditional like dialogue sense, but even Hadestown, which is almost entirely sung, has a really
And Hamilton.
strong book. Yeah, Hamilton too. Like both have like a really strong book to back them up on. Whereas we look at things like if we go back over to the previous column, Book of Mormon and Kinky Boots, I would not say have like incredible books. Like they have them.
No.
Even Once, I don't think has an incredible book. I love it. It's like one of my favorite musicals. But if we look at these, I mean, Spring Awakening's book is trash. Like it's not well written at all. It's my favorite musical. In the Heights, amazing book, super strong.
But that's also because Kiara Hudes, who's a brilliant playwright, and if you hear about like early versions of In the Heights, like they needed to bring somebody in to help with the structure because like Lynn had like so many crazy side characters and different plot lines. So it's like, yeah, like that play was just that, like, yeah, you need to bring somebody in like Kiara to work on that book. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what do you, so going back to this slide of these couple questions, do you guys think that, do you think that we will be seeing a change in the structure? So when we look at like musical theater of old, we see like the book musical was really strong, right? So that was a thing that happened. Then we saw the concept musical emerge, and then the mega musical emerge, and then the corporate musical, like the movie musical, all those. Like, do you think that we are in a new era of structure, and what would you say it is?
I feel like the book musical is just something that's so relatable to everybody. I don't necessarily think that there's going to be a shift I don't believe there'll be a shift at any point. I think that when you do look at what the trending has been for the past 10 years, it's still book musical, with the exception of 6. All of those shows are really strong book musicals.
Do you think that the book musical is being redefined at all? Like if we look at like how Rodgers and Hammerstein, if we look at Golden Age, do you think that we're potentially defining a new Golden Age at all? Or what do you guys think of that? Because that is something that is being thrown out by a lot of people. And I would be curious to know if you guys think we are in a new Golden Age, or if we're kind of more in that like intermediary that we were in the 70s and 80s, or coming up with our own new era.
I think that dance has become a less integral part to theater than it has been in the past. When you look at it, 100 years ago, you had Watch Your Step and you had On Your Toes in 36. And, almost 100 years later, that's kind of being phased out. Dance is not as important as it used to be. And it's more about the songs driving the story forward.
Ooh, that is so interesting because I disagree with you.
Yeah, me too.
Because and this is why, and you might be like, oh well, yes, that's not what I meant at all. But with the emergence of like with Bill T. Jones and what he did in Spring Awakening and bringing actual modern dance to the stage and new contemporary dance, like we've seen that like all over, like Natasha, Hadestown. Even there's like a bunch more, even American Idiot, which is in contemporary, like it's used in a really non-traditional way than we're used to, right? Like in the Golden Age, it was like very ballet and like way more involved because we had like those 12,000-hour dance breaks that we all hate as directors because kids can't do them. So we had those, but then we also have people like Jerry Mitchell and Casey Nicolai, who the prom, I taught a combo from that this summer. I wanted to die. Like it's so hard and so athletic. So I feel like dance is like definitely taking a new role, but like it's going either like in two directions. It's super crazy athletic, or it's like very contemporary, or it's like who freaking cares? Like with Tootsie, like I didn't care about a single dance number because it was so like traditional. But I also just didn't care about Tootsie, which I know Matthew is like, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, but like I think that that's really true, Marianne, what you said. But Rita, what did you have to say about that?
Well, I just feel like a lot of shows are using dance to move the story forward, to tell the story, like how you said in like The Great Comet or like Hadestown or Bright Star. The way that dance is used is so different than like your typical musical theater dance.
Ooh, maybe that's a point. Maybe we need to make a differentiation because Marianne, what you were saying, I think maybe there's differentiation between stylized movement and blocking and dance. And from a traditional dance point, I agree with you. But I think it's yeah.
But it's more of like staging, kind of how you said, like more like movement. Just I feel like a lot of like shows have been using dance to drive the plot forward. But like you said, Lindsay, I kind of agree with you. Like it's more of like a stylized blocking, staging kind of feel.
Yeah, because like Once is some of my favorite choreography ever, but does it even count as choreography?
Right. Right.
Stephen Hoggett.
Yeah. Does anybody else have what else do you guys think? What else structure wise? I think Marianne, you brought up a really great point of like how dance is used. Do you think that we're going to see a new structure? Or does anybody, what other thoughts do you guys have? I want to open up the floor and because we're almost done and I want to see is what other thoughts do you guys have as far as like the future goes? Like, where do you think we're going? Do you even think right now Broadway is going to come back? And what do you think Broadway will look like when we finally get to open again? If we do, we will, but yeah.
We have a lot of like, it's more of an ensemble show over just like, here are your clear leads. And now like, just follow their story while we have backup dancers and singers. Like shows have like evolved into like everybody in the show being an important part, an integral character. Like you see that like even with like a show like The Great Comet, like it was a big ensemble show, but all of their characters were so important to what was going on.
It's so true.
Like even Hamilton, like the ensemble dancers, like they're part of the story. They move it forward.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's like a big thing now, over separate of like, here's the ensemble, here are our lead players. Go.
Yeah.
How about the role of the orchestra? Are we going to see musicals with these massive orchestras? Are we going to see a musical with an overture? Is the trend just going to become both stylistically but also for economic decisions? Is acting musicians going to be the norm for a long time?
Well, I feel like we got rid of overtures about the same time we got rid of openings, titles to movies and you know, titles to TV shows. That kind of went away because the audience wants to get right into the show. You know, it used to be that an overture kind of gave you an overview of what you're going to hear. But now with the advent of digital music and everything being a click button away, people could hear what's going to be coming. So they don't need that recall from the beginning. They just want to get into the story.
That's a really great point.
What's the last musical?
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, you're good. What's the last musical you guys saw that was on Broadway? Because I know Honeymoon in Vegas has an overture, but other than that, I can't think of anyone that has been produced.
Does Jagged have an overture? Because I thought I saw that it did, but I could be completely wrong.
Let's look. I haven't seen Jagged.
I haven't either, and I really haven't listened to the music, but I thought I saw.
Yeah, you need to listen to the music. Everybody needs to listen to Jagged Little Pill.
Oh, it was on my. Me and Marianne were supposed to go see it, and then all of this happened. Yeah, it has an overture.
Yeah, so they do.
Yeah, the last two shows I saw, and they both had overtures on Broadway, and it was Oklahoma and Hello Dolly. But does Oklahoma have an overture, or do they just walk out on stage and start "Oh What a Beautiful Morning"?
No, there's an overture.
Yeah, the first thing that we see on the stage is "Oh What a Beautiful Morning."
Yeah. Okay, yes, but the little band comes out and but yeah, I remember seeing Hello Dolly and that big overture, and I'm just like, yeah, that's not. They don't do that anymore. I
do love seeing the orchestra on stage, though. That's something that has become really common, and I just, especially depending on the show, I just feel like it makes so much sense in the world of it. My high school, right after I had graduated, they did Little Shop. and they had their entire pit on stage in like a garage, and it was just so cool, especially for a high school. It was just so different. And it was kind of nice to like see the players interacting with the actors. It was fun.
The new production of Company actually has a full orchestra, and the full orchestra, this isn't really a spoiler, but it's suspended above the stage. And so like when it gets to the in comes Company, like when you're in that moment, like when everybody starts to come into the house, the curtain goes up. And you don't know that it's like, it just looks like the runner at the top of the stage, but it goes up and there's a whole enormous orchestra and the audience loses their mind. And I'm like, this orchestra has probably never had anybody lose their mind over that. But I love seeing the orchestra on stage. And it was really cool with Company to see a full orchestra, like huge. I don't know how, I guess you can do Sondheim with a small orchestra. I guess they did that with Sundays in the Park with George, but yeah, it was interesting. So yeah, I love that orchestra and like orchestrations, like what are going to happen to that?
I also love seeing the cast play instruments on stage. I like having, like a set pit as well, but like having like in Hadestown, have some of the characters, how the Fates, they all play different instruments. Like it's just such a cool vibe.
Yeah, I love that.
It's different to the story, yeah.
Any other different, do you think? Sorry, Miriam.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, going off of what you said about seeing a full orchestra, I love going to see the shows at City Center because they always have a full pit there. Yes. And 90% of the time, they do work something into the show where they're interacting with the pit behind them. Me and my girl, we kept going back. It was great.
It's so special, City Center, what they do.
Yeah.
Encore, it's just such a cool thing.
Yeah.
Any other trends? I'm curious about what people think as far as like revivals go. So we touched a little bit on revivals, but now you guys kind of know, like from the other classes or the other meetups, like what we've seen in the past. What role do you think revivals are going to play going forward?
It seems like there's been a lot of revivals coming. There was one year of the Tonys where there was like only 2 or 3 shows nominated because there was like no revivals that year. Was that?
That was the Kiss Me Kate
last year?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, okay.
I can't remember the other. There's only 2, and I can't.
No, it was Kiss Me Kate in Oklahoma.
Oh, okay, yeah. Then it was, yeah.
So like I feel like that season there wasn't a lot of revivals, but then I feel like there's so much coming up.
Yeah.
Or maybe it just feels that way because a lot of the shows have been workshopped and out of town, and like I've been following them this season, but it just feels like.
I feel like with revivals, since we have this kind of emergence of how can we change the classic revival into something new.
Company, yep, that makes sense.
Company,
Oklahoma.
1776, Oklahoma.
Carousel.
Right. But see, for me, the interesting thing is that the structure of Carousel pretty much stayed the same. They didn't change music. They didn't really.
Well, it didn't last long.
It didn't last long.
But Joshua Henry was phenomenal.
He was. And Lindsay Mendez was really good.
Oh my God, Lindsay Mendez, she was different than you've ever seen her before.
Right. So I think that you're going to have people that are saying, oh, this is okay to take these musicals that everybody knows and loves and kind of change them. And is it going to be good or bad? We don't know. Like the whole West Side Story thing, I am not crazy about what they're doing there either. So how much is going to be too much to get away from source material with that? And how much is the artistic community going to allow them to go before it snaps back?
Yeah, we really need another West Side revival after one was just revived in like 2009. Yeah, as they 9 or 10.
I mean, yeah, I don't even know. I have like I had tickets the day that the shutdown happened to go see West Side Story. I kicked myself for not seeing it because I actually really love his work from like a performance art standard. But I also agree with you, Sean, not probably his story to tell, but the way that they've restructured it is fascinating. And I was going to go with a friend of mine. We were going to do a podcast episode about that in Company to talk about like at what point does the story not exist anymore? Like if you take the dream sequence and I Feel Pretty out of West Side Story and you cut 60 minutes of material, is it West Side Story?
Right.
But Stephen Sondheim is like totally supportive of it. So then it's also like, okay, well, if the playwrights are okay with it and cool with it, and Sondheim is like, yeah, revive my work, like do it weird, I don't care. Like even cut orchestrations from Sundays in the Park, right? Like totally minimalize this whole show. But like it is interesting. It is an interesting quandary of at what point are we gonna our estate's going to say no? And what stories are we telling? Like the current, or like not the Yiddish version of Fiddler, but the other one before that, like what was the point? Did we really get anything new from that story?
Right.
And how far do you change it before you lose the theme, the meaning of it?
Right.
And can you change the meaning of it? Because you can from a directing standpoint, but at what point is it too much that you've changed it? And I think that, oh, go ahead, Sean, yeah.
I was going to say, and I think casting has a huge part to do with that too, especially in terms of this new West Side Story revival, where they really had like a very diverse cast, both Jets and Sharks. And what does that, so like then like, do we take the racism out of it and just make it, I mean, and I see that a lot in high schools actually too. Like, I think I told you this, Lindsay, but a friend of mine was going to direct a production of Cabaret at her high school. And it's a really diverse high school. And like, what really made me cringe, except for besides doing Cabaret for high schools, was the idea that like, you're going to have people of color playing Nazis. And that completely like takes away the idea, especially with like, yeah, this, well, first of all, white Nazis is white nationalism. It can't just be looked at as, well, everybody's racist and it's just a story about hatred. Like, no, it's a very specific story about white nationalism. Yeah.
Right.
And so what do we do when, I think the Oklahoma revival did that really good, especially towards the end of that show where they had one of the African-American characters say, it just doesn't feel right seeing this white guy get off for murdering. But I mean, I've also seen, I mean, especially in high school, productions of Oklahoma where everybody's white except the only POC is Judd. And I don't think, I mean, you're up the Joshua Henry thing, and like, yes, I love Joshua Henry. I would like to see him do all of the classic roles, but it's like, do we really need stories about Black men hitting white women? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that that's a consideration that we all are in this weird space now, as we are kind of going back to like one of the first questions, like the idea, it's not colorblind casting anymore. Like that's a great thing that did happen for a long time to increase diversity, but now we're being more intentional both as a society, just in how we talk about things, but also we have to take that in consideration on the stage. So now we're also transitioning from this idea of colorblind to color conscious. And some directors are coming along with it quicker. And like you said, Sean, Oklahoma was a really great example of like using the color conscious casting to further the thesis of that work. I didn't get to see Carousel, but Joshua Henry can sing the like magic thing. But what is the thesis of the work when we do see that character there? Or what is the thesis of My Fair Lady in 2018? Like, and the changes that they made there.
Well, that's like, oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Even in West Side Story, this new revival, the guy playing Tony is half African-American.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed a lot in the story.
And that was, I think, has anybody seen it in this call?
I've had a lot of friends who have seen it.
Yeah, I wish my friend was here. Maybe I'll do something with him next month and examining that stuff. Because like he's seen both. He's a Sondheim expert guy. And he said the entire thesis of West Side Story is different and it's fully supported by Yvonne's work, but it's not West Side Story in the traditional. So they take an entire different point of view and as the lens. It's not the traditional like white versus Hispanic, but there is still inherent racism in the show. I don't know enough. He could come and talk about it. Maybe I'll actually have him do that for one of our workshops next, or in June we'll have him do that. But yeah, I think it's I just want to make you respectful of everybody's time. I know that we're over. I'm happy to stick around if people want to continue to have this conversation, because some of our best conversations happen after we're done. So I just want to like, just in case anybody needs to go, I think that these are all really important questions, and I really hope that over the last month, kind of looking at theater and musical theater history like through this lens has helped at least inform you more, or drive home the point of why it's really important that we create clear theses when we go into work, and why it's important to look at the who, what, where, and when, and why. Because this is how we can create musical theater in a way that's relevant to our communities today, and creates those active, engaged audience members as opposed to the passive. And I think just to wrap up this specific class and why we ended with this more general conversation is we get to decide. And as for the educators in this call, like, you get to hold the future of musical theater patrons, mostly some artists, but mostly patrons, and help them create artistic value and see what's important in the world. And so they are going to be the ones that are buying tickets. And if we want them to buy tickets to things other than Disney, how can we help shape their creative journey at this time? And for people that are younger that are in the call or watching this in replay, like, you guys understanding the history of where we came from can help really drive home where we go forward. And remembering it's not about spectacle, it's not about the known commodity necessarily, that this art form was created by rebellious people, probably super angsty teenagers as well. As funny as it is to think of like Oscar Hammerstein as an angsty teenager, I'm sure he was in some way. And so use your voice and your thoughts just like our predecessors have to create amazing art. And so with that, like I said, we'll stay around. If you, like, as we've said a bunch of times in here, if you are interested in ReTheater's programming, we have a bunch more things. Very exciting. You guys are the first people to hear this, but we now are officially in partnership with BookTix, who has made all of our April's programming possible, but they have upped their sponsorship, and we are now opening up our Spotlight community for educators for free through the sponsorship of BookTix. So in there, we do a lot more work. We have more brainstorms than we do in this format. And we also have a group of mentors that you can talk with and ask questions. It's all specifically around educators who want to make art that matters in their community. It's not so much like what we see with the other Facebook groups. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to throw it over in the chat and we'll follow up with that as well. And the other thing that we are launching, so all of our May programming comes out tomorrow, and it's all about creating community in the time of COVID, and doing that digitally, as well as mental health awareness, because Mental Health Awareness Month starts tomorrow. We are tomorrow also launching our Musical of the Month Club, which is basically a book club but for musicals. We have a group on Facebook where we're going to break apart musicals every month, and do a bunch of, like, obviously fanning out about how much we love musical theater, but then also looking at, like, oh, what are the characters' journeys in this, and like digging into the show as well. And then we'll have a talk every month. Next month we're doing 4 because it's mental health awareness and we have a different partnership going on. But we'll be looking at Dear Evan Hansen, Assassins, Next to Normal, and Fun Home. So if you're interested in that, obviously it's free because it's a book club. So I'll put that over in the link as well. And then finally, all of our programming is done on a pay what you can basis. There is never any requirement for pay because we want to, like, hang out. And this has been very fun. If this has been informative and you have the ability and you're interested, we are accepting donations that go directly towards helping keep all of our artists on staff. But there's never any obligation. So that is my spiel, and that I'm so happy that you all have been here. We're going to send out a survey at the end. We would love to hear your guys' feedback. But other than that, we hope that you guys take care and continue to make art that matters in your community. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. If anybody wants to stick around and chat, we can do that. So yeah, there we go.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Lindsay,
Sorry. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I have one question for you, Lindsay. So we talked about a couple weeks ago, and I was just talking to one of my friends about it, and I just wanted you to clarify. So for the structure of musical, I know we didn't really focus on that much, but can you talk about how the purpose of the book and the song, and then in an operetta, what the difference, and how that plays into the storytelling of the character development? Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you
okay,
just
so a
help me?
traditional book musical, the plot is advanced through the dialogue and the character experience and journey happens through the song. So if you think of like when we talk, you know, the 5 song types because you've worked with me enough, like the I am, who I want, transition, decision, realization. Okay. In a jukebox musical, it is reverse. So in the jukebox musical, for the most part, the dialogue is where we see character development, and then we also see the plot advanced through the story because we're taking found material. So that's oftentimes why like jukebox musicals feel really clunky. All Shook Up actually is a really great example of how that can be pushed back against. I mean, I only bring that up, Matthew, because we worked on that together. But if you think about like, there obviously are songs like Honey Bear, right, or whatever the name of that stupid song is. Blue Suede Shoes. That is all plot development, right? Like we don't see any character development there. But then if you, whatever the song is that Chad sings at the end of, or the middle, like right towards the end of Act 2, that does have character emotion. So is I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Little less conversation depending on how it's staged, can go either way. So in the way that we did it was plot advancement, not a character advancement. So that's that. And then operettas, the difference there is going to be that in operettas, you're going to have more musical scenes. And so like if we think about Les Mis, there's like actual songs where they are just speaking back and forth, and that is where the plot is advanced. But then in the actual like traditional songs, so like I Dreamed a Dream, On My Own, Heart Full of Love, you know, like all those, like the solo songs specifically is where we see the character development happen. So like One Day More, there should be no character development that is happening in there except for Cosette and Marius, because they are the only people that are deciding to take a new step. Everybody else is already decided. Sorry. I hope is that helpful?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Great. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I think last week or the week before you had mentioned that one of your next courses was going to be about song structure, like the I Want song stuff. Is that still happening? What month is that?
So that's going to be in June. So our June courses are specifically looking, and I can just tell you right now. So our June courses are looking at how to take your program up a notch and also your artistry up a notch. So the class I'll be teaching is musical mechanics. And looking specifically at story structure and song structure and like breaking that apart. We also are going to have classes that month on intimacy directing and intimacy conscious rehearsal rooms, as well as trauma-informed practice and culturally responsive work. Our like guests that month are crazy. Next month, so starting tomorrow, because it's about creating community, it's very similar to this month where we're having a bunch of brainstorms, but we're going to be doing work specifically on verbatim theater. We have the director of the Verbatim Lab from NYU who is going to be leading some workshops on verbatim theater, as well as devising. I'm going to be doing that workshop with another friend of mine, and I'm going to be doing movement devising. And then we're doing a bunch of brainstorms like about like how we can create community with our students and stuff. So yes, so we will definitely, to answer your question, very long answer, it will be in June. But
so you're gonna send out like email of all of those, right? Because I definitely want to put them all. So.
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to send out that. Rita, are you a teacher?
Kind of. So I'm a performer, but I also I direct the musical at my old high school. I directed community theaters and stuff. I teach like younger kids. So I'm like a mix of both.
You should join Spotlight, because like that stuff I talk about all the time over there. It's free, so like come hang out. I think it would be really not helpful in that you need the help, but like it'd be a community. And we also like have a whole membership site where I have all of that information like in worksheet form, and I think
I saw that membership site on the website.
Yeah. I removed it because everybody clicked on it and was like, I'm not putting my credit card in for a free class. And I'm like, oh no, that's not actually what's happening. You're clicking on the wrong button. So yeah, but that's free now because of the partnership with BookTix. So I can send you the information if you want, but
Yeah,
I think
please.
like it'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
And
love
Sarah is
that.
a part of that group. So she came to all the stuff, but yeah.
Well, I would love that. I really appreciate it. The class has been great. I'm looking forward to more.
Oh, good. Yeah, and please let us know if you have other questions ever, like, or if you have different topics, any of you guys that you want to cover. Like, we're always happy to continue to create new things.
Thank you so much. Hopefully I'll get to see you one day in New York.
Oh my God, I hope so. I hope I'm back soon. I had a bunch of friends go back yesterday, so I'm like, they're sending me photos, and I'm like, I'm so sad. But yes, and I'm back. We'll go to a show.
Yeah, hey, I'm always down to go to a show. I'm gonna need to do a lot of catch up. So
Hey, do that.
thank you
All right.
so much.
Absolutely.
Guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna go too, but thank you so
Okay.
much. Really good class. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. All right. See you, Matthew.
This was wonderful, Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm gonna look into the book club thing. And I'm doing Chessa's workshop on Saturday.
Oh, sweet. Awesome. Great. It's going to be
Yay.
so good. I know,
I'm excited.
she actually hosts it through us. So I'll also
cool.
do it on Saturday. I like run the chat and
Awesome.
everything for her. So, and then, yeah, it's so good. And she's doing them again in June, officially like sponsored through us, not in partnership. So I think you'll
Cool.
love it. She's so freaking good.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, both of your, I don't know if I got to tell you this, but yeah, both of your work that you did for Indoor Person, I love so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It actually means a lot. Yeah,
No.
it was a
Oh,
fun
have you been watching the Corn stream?
A little bit. Yeah, actually.
Oh my gosh, they're killing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm waiting for Shannon to like confirm and get back to me. But Normal Av is gonna do like like hour and a half segment or episode for flipping the script this month, and they're gonna talk
wonderful.
about Corn stream for about a half an hour of it.
Yeah.
Then the other like 45 minutes to an hour is we're gonna talk about Indoor Person with both Kayla, Andrew, and then Olivia. And I think
that's awesome.
Shannon's going to come in, but we're talking about mental health all month. So
cool.
Yeah, I just think the work that they do is so great. I hope I can continue to be involved when I get back. So we'll see.
No, I had a nice call today with Kylie Brown, and like it's really like new territory, but I think they're really very much killing it when it comes to, okay, we are making Zoom plays.